6 years ago, I bought my house and garden estate, a HOA, against the advice of almost literally everyone I know. Everyone had a horror story about the high-handedness of HOAs, their tyranny, their intrusiveness. But when my wife saw the neighborhood layout and the house, she was sold. Nothing could convince her that this was not the best place for us to live in America. The only thing she did not like was that it was a community of browny, orangey houses, which was weird because it was called Garden Estate. So we took our fate in our hands and bought the place. The real estate agent said the HOA was not really strict and that we would hardly even know it existed, as long as we were neat, relatively quiet, etc. And to be fair, she was right. Except that 6 years after we moved in, we decided to repaint the house. Our youngest had been on a field trip to the local museum and seen pictures of our neighborhood from 30 years ago, and she said the houses were different colors, not a uniform brown. So we did some research of the HOA bylaws regarding paint colors and discovered that we could paint our house several shades of the approved colors. So we hired a contractor, and a few Saturdays later, at the beginning of summer, he got to work. By the time the entire thing began to come together, I had a few neighbors stop by to watch. Mr. Langley, my next-door neighbor, was one of them. He had been living in the neighborhood for at least 25 years, and he was not happy about what he perceived as a violation of the bylaws, not to speak of the fact that I was making his house seem old and shoddy beside my spruced-up facade. By the time the day was over, the HOA representative had driven by, and they had stood conversing together and pointing at my abomination of a house for at least 10 minutes. It was no surprise when I got my first citation the very next Monday. I responded immediately and enclosed a copy of the bylaws I had. We started going back and forth, but barely 2 Saturdays later, my next-door neighbor got the same contractor to paint his house too, the same shade as mine. I watched Mr. Langley have a fit outside his yard, and then watched as a few minutes later the same HOA representative showed up, and they had another finger-pointing session. The family a few houses down from mine soon began their own painting project, and by the time they were done, they had a gloriously lilac house. I say light purple, my wife says lilac, so lilac it is. Then the HOA called an emergency meeting, and we all had it out. Mr. Langley was there in the back row, arms crossed, staring stubbornly into space. The finger-pointing HOA rep read a long statement about tradition and community aesthetics and visual harmony, but they had nothing to stand on. Everyone had followed the rules. By the end of the meeting, the board backed down. They said they'd review the approved list. Our fines were canceled. Langley stormed out. It was amazing. A few months later, practically the entire HOA was a real garden estate again, with all sorts of fresh colors, each unique, all approved, and finally, actually aesthetically pleasing. All except Mr. Langley's, and it really did stand out because it was shoddy and old. Then he got a citation. I wasn't there to see it, but my son says he was riding his bike when the letter came, and he saw poor old Mr. Langley have the biggest fit. How the tables have turned.